Really quickly before we get started, this is the sort of video that's really only gonna hit the coolest of subscribers, so I want to shout out another channel of mine called Crub that I haven't had the chance to mention yet in a proper video here. If you ever wanted some more unscripted content from me, Crub's a joint venture between myself and a bunch of my creator pals, mainly in video podcast form. We've got some really fun discussions about games just like these that I don't get to gush about as much here on the Golden Bolt, as well as some other fun stuff in the pipeline such as interviews with game developers, the kind of stuff that I know you love, but in a more casual form so that we can give you more of it. We're really close to our goal of 1,000 subscribers for the year, so if you'd consider adding another channel of mine to your sub feed, I would genuinely really appreciate it, and I know you're gonna love it. The country of Norway does. We're somehow one of Norway's top gaming podcasts. Yeah. I'll link an episode here and in the comments talking about some of the stuff that I would change in my ideal next Ratchet & Clank game. Okay, thanks. Now let's talk about the definitive, indisputable best games of 2023. It's time for the Golden Bolt Awards, an award show named this because Smite thinks that it can steal my brand. This shit's trademarked, be careful. If you're new here, this is the 4th annual Golden Bolt Awards, except that I didn't make a Game of the Year video for the last 2 years, so you'll just have to guess who won those. This is a prestigious ceremony where I make up categories so that I have an excuse to either recommend cool games that you maybe haven't played, or just gush about my favorites of the year. First and foremost is the probably best game, I didn't play it award, so that you can understand why any of these games on the list didn't win something this year, because I didn't play it. I'm giving this one to Baldur's Gate 3 because I'm frankly afraid of the amount of time that I would put into it if I got sucked in, so I've refused to buy it for now. Honestly, a lot of 2023's biggest games I didn't play until near awards season, a consequence of playing more important games like My Sims. For my money, the fact that Baldur's Gate was somehow able to blow away nearly the entire gaming community and end up on the same level as something like Tears of the Kingdom, one of the most hyped games of the last decade to say the very least, I think on that alone, it's likely deserving of every award it's gotten so far. Speaking of Tears of the Kingdom, my 2023 Best Story Award goes to Lies of P. If Zelda hadn't just ignored the entire previous game's story, who knows, this could have been different. Lies of P is a game that I outright didn't expect to play to begin with, but I saw it on Game Pass while going through a bunch of the best games that I knew I was behind on, and I figured, why not? The reason I'm awarding it Best Story isn't because its main story is something that's going to blow you away, but because it's achieved what's to me the best melding yet of a traditional, coherent story structure with that classic Soul genre game design. I love that fuck it figure it out design when I do get into it, for the record. I usually avoid it with Souls because, again, time sink, and I'd rather be making stuff for you guys, like playing My Sims, than losing weeks to a FromSoft game, and that sense of organic discovery is one of those gaming drugs that'll pull me in like nothing else. That's why I found myself so taken aback by Lies of P still providing that by way of the little lore notes, providing a continually unfolding mystery of sorts so that you can learn environmentally why each area of this ruined city of Krot fell into disrepair, the combination of a petrification disease epidemic and a puppet uprising killing nearly the entire population. And it actually gets even better in New Game Plus when you're given a translator item for some of the previously corrupted dialogue the puppets will occasionally spew, further informing some of the stuff that you figure out later in the game. The game sneaks in an incredible amount of foreshadowing that made New Game Plus something I actively pursued, where, again, usually I wouldn't in a Souls game because by the end I've gotten my fill. Part of that is also because Lies of P has some stellar gameplay, to the point that some folks are calling it the de facto uncrowned Bloodborne 2, but that's not what I'm here to talk about right now. The short of it is that I believe Lies of P to be the most accessible Souls-like to date, and at least in my experience I also thought it was the easiest, which helps that, although buyer beware, a lot of seasoned Souls players have said this is one of the hardest, so to them I say, get good. Yeah, how's it feel when it's thrown back at you, nerds? Above all, the part of Lies of P's story that has me continuing to think about it pretty much every day since I first started it is that it's also such a deeply human game. I don't say that to play on the Pinocchio real boy thing, I swear, but every side quest, a lot of the optional boss fights against humans, it all has this somber air of desperation to it that tells those stories of regular people simply struggling to survive. There's a little kid that just wants to hear the friendly policeman puppet's train whistle one more time before the disease inevitably takes him, lamenting that his friends stopped coming around, probably because they all died too. And giving him that final joy is equal parts wonderful and heartbreaking, since since you have to kill the puppet in a required boss encounter to get that whistle, and since if you look carefully around that boss arena area, you can see that even after the puppet corruption took over that boss, he still had positive memories of the kids he befriended, almost as if he was being taken against his will towards this puppet uprising. There are so many tales like this throughout the game, of the puppets somehow breaking out of just being robots, struggling with newfound emotions and the concept of maybe becoming human themselves. How do you tell a puppet that's fallen in love with a dying human that these feelings of sorrow, they don't go away? Do you tell a woman blinded by the petrification disease that the baby you just gave her isn't actually her baby who's almost certainly been killed, but a puppet that you gave her just to make her feel better? Do you tell that truth, or do you break out of the commanding rules coded into these puppets and lie just to give a small comfort? The fact that this team did straight up make a game about puppets into this overwhelmingly genuine and human adventure, and that they spun the Pinocchio lying tale into something far more interesting than I ever would have expected from a simple dialogue option here or there, it's marvelous. There are easily a dozen or two different stories just like this, each one gut-wrenching in its own right, and I'm not going to do it justice by telling you how much it resonates. However, I'm also dancing around any discussion of the main story beats because, once again, the way it uses the puppet allegory by the end, it just sticks with you. So I'll end on this. This studio was able to repurpose a pop song it created 15 years ago for DJ Max of all games, and turn it into this beautiful side quest reward, a jazzy rendition that you might never even hear depending on how you play the game, a song that stopped me and countless other players outright while we were walking around the home base area for 4 straight minutes worth of song from the moment that it started playing, not just because it's a good song or because it nearly got a tear out of many of us, but because it's synced up with every emotion the game wants to elicit from cover to cover. Hopelessness, despair, maybe a little fear, and then partway through, you find those melancholy undertones of comfort, familiarity, compassion, hope. The fact that it catches me still, it's beautiful, and that's what this game is, beautiful. Even if you aren't a Souls fan, don't sleep on Lies of P. I think it informs what even proper FromSoft Souls games could learn from story-wise, as much as there will always be a place for the purely organic discovery and millions of lore videos. The fact that it would also almost win my Best Gameplay award speaks just as highly of it, but this award's a little bit tougher than that because Hi-Fi Rush is another incredibly strong contender. The feat that Tango Gameworks pulled off in making a full, lengthy hack-and-slash game synced to the beat of its soundtrack without punishing the rhythmically challenged essentially whatsoever, it's just so good. I actually played my first run of Hi-Fi Rush in what I call Sinner mode, where I was catching up on podcasts and whatnot while playing. Still with the sound on, of course, but I went in knowing that I'd be getting a lesser experience because I just wanted my brain to be off for a bit. Sadly, when part of your job is having to hyper-focus on every single detail of a game and stop and start to take time-stamped notes all the time, finding time to just enjoy pressing buttons, it can be rare. And not only did I not miss out by playing this way, I was so engrossed in it that time and again I would end up pausing that other crap to really listen in and just vibe. And then there's Final Fantasy XVI, maybe my favorite baby's first hack-and-slash game that I've ever played, more on that one in a bit, but I couldn't nudge away from giving the nod to The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom here. Now, obviously much of this game's gameplay is derived from what we all played 6 years ago with Breath of the Wild, I know. I was even on record multiple times over on the Crubcast, actually, unintentional second plug for Crub there if you didn't go subscribe yet, you could have heard me age poorly in real time. I was on record there saying that I was really starting to fear that Nintendo maybe couldn't pull it off again, that I was afraid that this game wouldn't be able to capture me like Breath of the Wild did, that maybe not enough was going to be done to make the same world and basic gameplay structure feel novel and worth such a wait. And wouldn't you know it, Zelda also gets the Game I Was Most Wrong About award, an award for exactly what I just said. That's the full name of the award. Not only did I do essentially everything in Tears of the Kingdom again aside from the Korok seeds, just as I'd done with Breath of the Wild, and not only did I lose 100 hours doing so and getting engrossed in the world, they found so many new ways to tickle that same organic discovery part of my brain that I mentioned loving earlier. There's the new vehicle crafting system, of course, but I'm not even thinking as much about all the time I lost messing around with that. Instead, I'm thinking about things like the depths, and the fact that they were able to take what was nearly the exact same base world that I'd combed over and again, done nearly everything in, including every side quest and every armor piece. They took that, and they were able to give me so much more. The depths alone are one of my favorite gaming memories in 2023, just spending hours at a time down there, running like a coward and sneaking through areas for which I was woefully under-equipped early on, lit only by the faint glow of the bright bloom seeds I had in my pocket when I first dove down, the quantities of which were often a key resource to manage, lest I have to come back up for air before I was really done spelunking. A lot can be said about the black magic that Nintendo, and if we're being real, Monolith Soft utilized to make the free-falling so seamless from thousands of feet up from the Skylands, but I just came back from playing the Pokemon Violet DLC, and going from a Pokemon popping up several seconds after I somehow started a battle with it not knowing it was there, going from that to, oh look, I can see the exact path I carved for several miles just by the glowing lights on the same system 6 months later, is baffling both ways. I just adore how they were able to take the same map that was such a slow, vertical experience to explore the first time around, and that's a good kind of slow, and both capture that exact feeling again with the depths and the Skylands while recontextualizing the main surface into a faster-paced horizontal exploration focus with the vehicles and movement options. And that says nothing about the infinitely improved shrine puzzles, the never-ending experimentation of fusing items together or drowning Koroks, or using an ability that just lets you no-clip through every single surface in the goddamn game, with 99% of players never encountering a single noticeable bug with that mechanic. It's the kind of shit that shouldn't be possible in a polished AAA game, now or in the past, but leave it to Nintendo, of course, to just give you debug tools that are more polished and fleshed out than most anything out there. Even going back to grab footage, I lost way too much time just screwing around because every facet of this game is cater-made to my dumb brain. I may still draw issue with how the story completely ignores essentially the entirety of its direct predecessor, but at the end of the day, I can't say I truly cared all that much aside from making those nitpicks when you really start to think about it. By the way, the game I was most right about award, another open world experience, although more technically so. Sadly, I'm talking about Starfield. Maybe in a few years it'll be the game that it should have been. I want to do some more gushing, so I'm going to sandwich in the most overlooked game here, and since I dunked on Pokemon a minute ago, I'll talk about this year's winner of the most overlooked award, Cassette Beasts. I'm not usually into the monster collecting genre unless it's Pokemon, and even then I've fallen out of Pokemon as much as I've fallen into it at this point. Cassette Beasts, though, ended up really standing out to me this year as yet another game that I just find myself thinking about a lot. Like, every few days it pops into my mind and I just think, yeah, fuck yeah, that game was great. It took me a few months to get from the opening 20 minutes of the game to actually playing any further part of it, but that's just because I was playing on Game Pass and it's a perfect handheld game for a Steam Deck, and I kept putting off setting up the workaround to get Game Pass streaming to work on Steam Deck. Anyway, don't do that. Whatever excuse you might have to not start this game, toss it away. Cassette Beast throws you into a strange pocket dimension far away from your home, where you'll find a settlement called Harbor Town, spelled with a U, so you know this dimension is the one where British people matter. Everybody you meet is similarly stranded, each from their own version of the world we know and love. And some have been here enough to have moved on, started families. There are children that are from this strange world. Some folks yearn to get back home, others prefer it here because they had a chance to start over. There's a weird death cult fighting against the town and a separate kind of cult of zombie property owners trying to gobble up land, and yet despite all that, the game rarely drops its cozy atmosphere. Each of the partner characters that you can team up with will have their own little side quests, and you'll build a sort of social link with each of them just by exploring together and touching base at the campfires when you go to rest. Cassette Beasts just oozes charm, and it leads hard into its late 80s, early 90s nostalgia in a way that goes beyond the usual indie game set dressing that we're all maybe starting to get tired of finally. Your Pokeballs are cassette tapes, of course, and your heals are pencils so that you can go and stab them in and rewind the tapes like you have to do with tapes. I don't know if you guys remember what cassettes are. And although at first they joke, yeah, we don't know why this works either, just go with it, there actually is a narrative payoff to that mechanic that was way better than I expected. The monsters are mostly inspired designs. Some obviously end up looking like, oh yeah, that's somebody's fake Pokemon, huh? But then you have one like Cat 5, a feline with Ethernet cable tails, and that makes everything worth it. Underneath a lot of that Pokemon-inspired set dressing is a game that has a lot of thought put into it. Whether it's the strategy of your human form having a separate health bar underneath the form you take when you're fighting with any of your beasts, meaning that you have to be careful when trying to catch other beasts, or that you can prioritize one enemy trainer with both of your party to take down both the beast and then the human underneath to knock them out of the fight entirely before they can send out a new beast, or even stuff like this game's version of shiny Pokemon actually changing the beast's element, with each beast having a recolor for each and every type. Hell, the overworld coincidentally happened to match the do-whatever-you-want open-world structure of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, but here you unlock a couple different abilities by catching specific monsters, to swim or destroy certain walls or climb walls in general, making the world a bit closer to a Zelda or even Metroid-y adventure instead of just a Pokemon one. The full difficulty sliders mean that you can tweak it so that this game's version of gym leaders and even wild beasts can scale to or above your level instead of being all set in stone like in those recent Pokemon games. You can even adjust it so the AI has better or worse strategies in battle. So between all of this, your path through the world and your experience with this game will be totally different than anybody else's. And again, above all, it just ends up feeling comfy throughout. There are corny but kinda perfect lyrics that come up with some of this game's stellar songs, usually when you enter a building in town or during battle when you fuse with your partner because oh yeah, this game has nearly 20,000 distinct fusions between every combination of every beast. The tracks themselves exist independent of the lyrics most of the time, but during these key set-piece moments, the lyrics will blend over the top of that backing track, and it turns what were already good earwormy video game songs into these stupid anime friendship wins moments that you can't help but love even more. The closest analog I can think of is some of the cornier Sonic tracks where the lyrics are super forced into matching whatever that game or stage's theme is, but instead of like butt rock, it's almost like a butt alternative. Every part of this game attempts to fit into a whole that's greater than the sum of its individual parts, which plays into the game's underlying story being rooted in Gestalt psychology. Oh, and that Pokemon fusion concept probably perked up the ears of any Pokemon fan game player that somehow hasn't heard of this game yet, and in general, this is a series of spins on exactly that kind of die-hard Pokemon fan experience. Now, I'm not one of those die-hard fans, so I just kinda clicked buttons and did cool moves, but if you're super into Pokemon move meta and theory crafting, you can absolutely shatter this game's balance thanks to how it handles its version of type matchups. See, here these super effective moves aren't a damage buff, it's usually instead a special effect of some sort. If you use a wind move on a glass type, for example, it creates a resonance effect. If you do that 3 times so that they've got 3 out of 3 resonance underneath the little beast's health bar thing, they just die instantly. Other versions of this include not very effective debuff variants where it might cause a poison spike effect that damages any subsequent physical attacks if you hit, for example, a metal type with a poison move or something like that. The reason it's so easy to break is that you have way more than 4 moves per beast, you get procedurally generated variants of moves that have extra effects, some move stickers, oh by the way the moves are stickers you put onto the tapes or peel off, adorable, some of them have an effect where one can chain into the other or one automatically goes into effect at the start of the battle, and between all of this and every battle being a double battle, you can take down enemies before the first turn. It's amazing. Anyway, play Cassette Beasts, you won't regret it. Okay, moving along to this year's Breakout Performer, a voiceover or acting performance that just blew away anything I would expect from somebody who isn't traditionally known in the game voice acting or voiceover or acting space. That would be Ben Starr, also known as Clive in Final Fantasy XVI. Now, I have to be careful here to avoid spoilers, so this one's probably going to be quick and vague, but while you stare at Ben Starr being blinded at the Game Awards, a not very quick disclosure. Square Enix actually sent me a review copy for this game after it came out, by which point the press cycle had ended and covering it would have actively harmed my channel, sadly. I actually turned the code down at first since I was going to be out of town during release week, and that's why I reached out to them 2 months early before I got bounced between multiple PR firms and then considered a streamer for some reason. You have no idea how bad the games industry was with this in 2023. I'm talking stuff like unnamed major AAA publishers accidentally sending out the editable link to their request form so you could just see people's personal info. That happened to me. Every creator I've chatted with has said the same, that this year was just awful for some reason. Shout out to all the outsourced PR firms that aren't doing their jobs. I guess after all of this, they felt bad, so they said they'd take the code anyway, so here's my disclosure. Thanks for letting me cover this game. 6 months late, it's only fitting. The worst part is, this game really vibed with me, and I would have loved to be able to put something together without having to decide between sleep and an algorithm, and Clive is a huge part of why. He's one of the more genuine Final Fantasy protagonists yet in my book. Mid. And the game's story, taking multiple time skips to carry you through multiple phases of his life, lets you engage with Clive in so many different scenarios, further rounding him as a person and rounding his performance by Ben Starr. I mean, for one, dude's got one of the best blood-curdling rage screams I think I've ever heard from a voice actor. But beyond that, you get to see Clive struggle early on with being this unwanted child, born into royalty but seen by most as this unimportant waste because he wasn't born with the phoenix gene that denotes the next true heir of his kingdom. And yet, Clive doesn't harbor any jealousy towards his little brother who did have that gene, instead giving him undying support and love. Just a genuine dude, to the point that I'm sure some folks consider him boring, and those people are wrong and bad people. Across each of those time skips, you get to see Clive develop from this maybe a bit naive mercenary type into a caring, good leader for this community of ragtag world savers, very much in the spirit of the classic Final Fantasy games in that regard. However, every time I want to go write down an example of really liking Clive's performance, it involves a major plot point that I can't explain without 10 minutes of setup and/or spoiling huge major chunks of the game, so just know that the emotion that Ben Starr brings into Clive's lines is masterful during the sad voice cracky moments or the stupid anime bullshit moments where the game starts to get maybe a little bit messy, or in the quieter moments when you're just buying a round of drinks for your little town. Clive's a caring dude that simply has good in his heart, even if that good manifests itself in a way that turns him into a pariah in the greater geopolitical world of this story. The best I can do, vaguely, is say that the game spends a lot of its runtime doing this super unsubtle, slow-burn romance between Clive and co-lead Jill, the kind of stuff that should come off as corny and has tripped up Final Fantasy games many times before. Even this, for as long as they stretch it, both of their performances ended up turning this into an admirable sort of paradoxically sometimes understated thing, and you end up rooting for it instead of begging for them to get it over with. I can't say I've experienced that before. FF16 takes a trove of tropey moments that should be annoying and makes them work, in huge part thanks to these genuine performances from our heroes. Maybe once the DLC's finished, I'll put together a proper video on it if you guys think that's something you'd want to see. There's a lot that I would love to gush about with this stupid game. Another disclosure, by the way, I bought that DLC the moment it shadow dropped because I was 100% in for more of this game. Square didn't send me that part, to be clear. Next up is my best game not from 2023. An honorable mention goes to Roundguard, which is just roguelike Peggle, yes, that's as fun as it sounds, and to Pokemon Legends Arceus, that's the correct pronunciation, which I picked up after Chris Mykonos fan told me that it was so much more polished than the most recent games, which was baffling. The winner this year, though, is Shovel Knight Pocket Dungeon. For the unfamiliar, it's Shovel Knight, but as a kind of roguelite matching puzzle game. You're going through levels themed mostly after the ones from the main game, with some new ones here and there, but here you're juggling the usual matching puzzle stuff instead of doing platforming, while also keeping an eye out for keys to open treasure chests or doors, watching your health since enemies damage you back when you start bumping into them to try and kill them. There are unique hazards for each and every level. It's just a stupidly fun puzzle game. And like with Shovel Knight Prime before it, Yacht Club is insistent on adding way too much free goddamn content at this one, and around when the first big update dropped, I got my Steam Deck. So, Pocket Dungeon, I think, is my most played Steam game this year. There are a couple dozen playable characters at this point, each with their own unique abilities, and with the first update, they gave each character a second ability that's completely different from the first one that changes how you play those characters, as well as the ability to randomly swap characters every run or every level. They added twice as many new enemies and mini-bosses to each level, along with like 100 different rule modifier hats that let you break the game for or against you. Now it's got mod support too, and multiple content updates still on the way. I don't know why they do this to themselves. They could just make a new game and make money on it, but they insist on not making money with their games, and I respect it. It's easier than ever to fall into that one more run addictiveness. Better yet, the entire experience is moldable with accessibility modifiers. If you want to give yourself 5 or 10 health instead of 3, or turn on baby mode like I do, where dying doesn't end your run, only filling up the entire board does, or if you want to slow down or speed up the rate at which blocks drop, whatever you want to do, they don't care, do it. And that's the best kind of roguelike customizability to me. If you're a puzzle game dork and haven't picked it up, or if you're a Shovel Knight dork and haven't picked it up actually, it's perfectly tuned to make either one of those types of dork go nuts. Okay, 2 more awards. Spider-Man 2 gets the Bridesmaid Award, a new one I'm adding this year because it's really funny how Insomniac always ends up coming in like 2nd or 3rd for major awards and then never wins any of them. One year I'm sure they're gonna have their Revenant moment, but this year the one awarded for Ursine Sex is Baldur's Gate, so it's not this year. Unlike in 2018, I can't even give the shout to Spidey as my game of the year this time around. I think that 2's a better game than 1, but it does run into a few hiccups related to having to juggle 2 Spider-Men at once, sometimes just kind of relegating Miles to the sideline for a bit in order to tell more of Peter's story, which, that's fine of course, but it can feel uneven. The gameplay is improved, but I'm the one person on Earth that liked the old gadget variety more because Spidey 1 was secretly a Ratchet & Clank game that they never really told you was a Ratchet & Clank game, and this instead is streamlined for the 30 million people that'll end up playing it as a beat-em-up game. I get it, I understand, but I'm still sad about it. Now, I already have a full review for it that you probably already saw, and a few of us over at Crub did a spoiler cast about it as well. I think that was our longest discussion yet over there, so check either one of those two out. And now it's time to set up suspense before saying Zelda's my game of the year. Wait, fuck. So I already kind of talked about it, and I'm not going to repeat myself too much, but there just didn't end up being a game that I can say sucked me in as fully this year as Tears of the Kingdom did. I'm so glad I was wrong and that they worked their dumb, usual Nintendo magic somehow. There is a question of whether they're going to do one more open-air game to finish this off as a trilogy, or if they'll completely pivot into something else going forward, and honestly, I think they could have one more of these in them, with a new world of course, and with a better storytelling structure. The biggest shortcoming with Tears of the Kingdom to me is that although it tells a more involved story than Breath of the Wild did, it does it via the exact same structure, and sadly that means the game has to repeat itself every single dungeon with the exact same cutscene. I'm not kidding, the scene doesn't change based on your dungeon order, it's identical every time, and that's lame. That plus them just ignoring a bunch of Breath of the Wild lore will always bother me a bit. This game is a direct sequel, there's no reason for a bunch of side characters to forget who the legendary hero is, or for them to acknowledge the divine beasts only a single time in the entire game without just saying, oh yeah, we took them apart and the Sheikah stuff went away, or anything like that. They had to explain that in an interview 2 months after the game came out. Why is that not just in a bit of flavor text? That's not hard to do. Now you might be wondering why I'm complaining about my Game of the Year pick, and the answer is because when I got to the ending, maybe the best ending sequence Zelda has ever had, and definitely my favorite set piece of this year, even at just different key moments throughout the story before that, none of this mattered. It's clear that they've got the chops to go all in, they just chose to play it safe. It's those sorts of hiccups that make it possible for them to do it one more time and go even further beyond, and it's also these sorts of hiccups that make it possible for a game like Baldur's Gate to, purely through its quality, match the hype and the undeniable edge that we'll all give to a truly stellar Nintendo game because we all grew up on Nintendo. That's part of why Tears isn't gonna be a unanimous winner when it very well could have been, because it did play safe at points in one of the most packed years for releases we've ever seen, and as a sequel to one of the most acclaimed games and most played games of all time, that's always gonna disappoint a little. But it's not like the entire game plays it safe either, and again, the fact that they just made debug tools a core mechanic, the level of polish the game has while doing so, stuff like that, or just the fact that this game's improvements make it hard to ever want to go back to Breath of the Wild sort of help you at least justify them hand-waving away the predecessor's lore, because after all, in 10 years is anybody gonna sit down and start with Breath of the Wild? Hopefully yes, but you never know. As I've said many times before, you can love something and still want it to be better, and that's where I ended up with this game. It's the one I put the most time into, it's the one I got the most absorbed in, and the only reason I end up bringing up these sorts of critiques is because otherwise I would just end up saying it's so good over and over and over again. Now, more important than my dumb opinion, what were some of your gaming highlights of 2023? Let me know in the comments, or if you're a YouTube channel member or Patreon supporter, you can let me know on the exclusive Gold and Bold Discord server. Now, this shouldn't be my final video of 2023. I have one more that'll hopefully slide in before the year's out as long as I don't get sick or anything, but since this one is mainly gonna hit subscribers, I do want to say thank you once again for making 2023 such a stellar year. I had a lot of video plans that didn't end up quite shaking out, which have moved to 2024 of course, and yet despite all of that, this was once again the best year in the channel's history so far, and for that, I can never express my thanks enough. My hope is to hit on all of those videos that I did have to put off next year, so that we can kick it even further into gear going forward, along with a little bit of that fuck it energy that led to some of those shorter videos that I can make a bit more frequently and that also ended up being some of my most successful this year. It'll be a juggling act, I'm gonna keep that in, to balance the big boys and the shorter ones, but I'm hopeful. So set a reminder to come back in 12 months and tell me how wrong I ended up being. As always, until next time, stay golden. A special thanks once again to those wonderful Patreon supporters for helping make videos like this possible, including Goldstorm07, Jump Rock, Mason Hunt, Philly D360, Phyrexian Sleeper, Agent Rodney220, The Critic of Innocence, Thomas Kuzma, and countless more. Thank you.